Well, the Queensland and federal governments are scrambling to keep Ampol's Lytton oil refinery open after the Brisbane facility recorded a $140 million loss last year. Lytton's potential closure follows ExxonMobil's announcement that its Altona refinery in Melbourne is to shut, raising major concerns about Australia's fuel security. One man who understands this issue better than most is Liberal Senator and former Major General Jim Molan, who has raised it for many months. He joins me now from Canberra. Senator Molan, thank you for your time. I'll get to you on the RSL from my last interview, but let's spell this out for viewers so they can follow it all at home. Australia's only got 4 functioning oil refineries. Of the 4, 2 are scheduled to shut. BP is closing Kwinana in WA. ExxonMobil is closing Altona in Melbourne. Ampol's Lytton refinery, this is Brisbane's under review. So too is Viva Energy's refinery in Geelong. I think that's the old Shell facility for those Victorians. Explain for my viewers, if you can, Jim, why should we be so concerned about the issue of fuel security? And more specifically, why is it important to have sovereign oil refining capability?
Peter, good evening. I think the basic fact that we should think about and understand when we look at this situation we're in at the moment is that for the last 75 years, commercial decisions could have been taken on the provision of fuel to Australia. We could always buy fuel cheaper overseas and bring it back to Australia and sell it cheaper to motorists in Australia. We're at a transition point, and it's a critical transition point. We have been prosperous because of American power, we've been secure because of American power, and we've embraced globalisation so that we buy anything cheap from overseas and sell whatever we can overseas. That's worked fabulously for 75 years, but we're at a transition point now. If you believe that there is no threat at all to the sea lanes of communication which bring 90% of our fuel from the Middle East, either directly or indirectly to Australia, then who cares whether we refine it ourselves? Peter, however, if you accept the fact that we move into the most uncertain strategic environment that we have had since 1945, if you believe that we can no longer guarantee that the world is a lovely place and everyone loves each other, then we better start worrying. And I certainly know that the government is concerned with this. I certainly know that Angus Taylor is doing a bit on this, but we've got to come to a conclusion about the overall strategy that we're going to take, not just to the military, not just to fuel, but also to everything else we do. I wrote an article in The Australian a couple of days ago, Peter, in relation to the need for a strategy. If you say to yourself, why do we need 2 or 4 refineries in this country? There's nothing to go back to and say, well, if it's just a commercial problem, we probably don't need them. But if there's more to this, if national security is important, we need to be able to pull crude out of our ground, such as Angus Taylor is pushing in Beetaloo and the government is pushing in Beetaloo, and we need to be able to refine it in this country.
But this goes to the broader issue, Jim, and I read your piece in The Australian, and you're absolutely right to say that it's a terrifying but realistic possibility that we could have a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, which is our region. The problem, I guess, is this sense that government is looking, and this is governments generically of all political persuasion, state and federal, they're looking at things silo by silo, like portfolio by portfolio. All the sort of debate about COVID is focused on the health advice, not the economic advice. Issues like fuel security is not just in the industry portfolio. It should be front and centre, beyond just issues of storage of the fuel reserve, but capacity and refining. It's got to be front and centre in the National Security Committee. Going through this pandemic, you can see how it disables countries around the world. Well, this idea that we might have future pandemics, not as a health concern, but as a national security concern, it's like, I mean, the whole purpose in a Westminster system is to have a cabinet government where all of these issues come together and there's a unifying sort of policy purpose across a whole government. I just get the sense sometimes that Minister X is over here and Minister Y is over here, but, it's not coming together as it should. And I think this issue, energy in particular, fuel reserves, is just so important.
This is probably the best example that we have to illustrate the need for bringing national security from somewhere into everything that every minister does. It also applies to the import of fertiliser. It applies to our manufacturing states. 40% of our manufactures come in from overseas. And it applies to a range of things. I mean, you say that we look at things in silos and in the short term. Yes, we do. But I've got to say we do that very, very well. And we as a government have solved today's problems very, very well. I guess my concern and the challenge is for me to convince people that we should have a medium to longer term strategy. I'm not saying we should spend billions more dollars that we don't have, but what I am saying is that it takes a nation to defend a nation. I think we've got somewhere between 3 to 5 years and 5 to 10 years to change the nature of this nation from being a nation which has relied on others, because the Americans can no longer defend all their allies anymore, and we've got to get that into our heads.
Look at Taiwan.
And China has China has a mind of its own.
Just on that point you made that, we have dealt with the silos very effectively in this pandemic, I credit you that. But I think in our this pandemic circumstances here in Australia, our biggest windfall has been our geography. The very fact that we're an island nation. I mean, Britain hasn't closed its borders throughout the pandemic, and I think it's suffering like no other country is. We used our geography. In this case, the case you're talking about now, our vulnerability is our geography. That's the thing that I guess we're all willing the government at this time of talking about net zero emissions. For God's sake, look where we are in the world. Is this the time we want to impoverish ourselves and be more vulnerable, not less vulnerable? I think that's where the government's got to have the debate.
I'd love that debate to be there. You're quite right. We've been at the end of the world for the last couple of 100 years, and no one's worried about us. We've gone long distances away to fight our wars, and with only one exception. But right now, the single point of failure of this nation is its ports. And we are so vulnerable in our ports. The Navy can protect one port, maybe two ports, and we have no ships. So these are the kind of things that...
And no submarines either.
Oh, no, we've got 6 good submarines, and people often forget
Never in the water at the one time, Jim Molan. Never in the water at the one time. You know that.
Oh, absolutely. But we are absolutely achieving world standard. We've got at least 3 or 4 in the water at one stage, at any one stage, ready for training and operations. And that apparently, Peter, I'm told, is world standard. But we've got to pull this all together in a strategy across the nation.
All right, you're a very good army man for there defending the Navy, but we'll leave it there. We'll come back and... Yeah, all right. Thanks, Jim Molan. I know you've got to go and you could well be in the chamber. Thanks for your time.